Hi, everybody. Can you all hear me? Hear me? Yep. Okay. Welcome to the museum's virtual conversation featuring Judy Laster, the founder and executive director of the Woods Hole Film Festival. Judy's going to tell us about the film festival's 30 years in Woods Hole and her thoughts on the future of the film festival and independent films in general. I just want to tell you that the museum is also hosting other virtual conversations this year as well. The next two will focus on science in Woods Hole. On March 10th, MBL Director Nipan Patel will discuss the MBL's 133 years of scientific discovery. And on April 14th, Phil Duffy and Heather Goldstone of the Woodwell Climate Research Center will bring us up to date on the research center. And in February, because it's Valentine's Day, we're collecting Woods Hole love stories for a social media post next month. So if you have one to share, please email us. But anyway, now let's listen to Judy. And if you have questions, please put them in chat and Judy will answer at the end. By the way, as you've noticed, we're muting everybody during the talk, including me, so you don't hear my 4-year-old granddaughter in the background. Great to have you, Judy.
Thanks, and thanks everyone for coming tonight. I know there are just a few other things going on in the world that you might have been interested in listening to the news, but hopefully this will be as interesting and exciting. You can listen to the news later. So for those of you who I may not have met before, my name is Judy Laster. I'm the founder and director of the Woods Hole Film Festival. And next summer, we will be having our 30th festival, making us one of the oldest festivals around and one of the oldest in the independent film world. And it's kind of auspicious that I'm talking to you today because this entire week I'm involved in a virtual conference with my film festival people from around the country. Normally we would be meeting in Utah for what we would call Art House Convergence for the week before Sundance. But this year we're meeting virtually and we just have the Utah setting as a virtual background. But the virtual aspect of it has actually allowed us to gather close to 800 film festival people, which when I started this 30 years ago, people were asking me what was a film festival. There was no such thing as a film festival world. There were no people who did film festivals for a living, maybe two, maybe there was the New York Film Festival, but in Massachusetts, there was the Boston Film Festival, and that was pretty much it. And when we started this, and I say we because I started this with Kate Davis, who some of you may know. She also grew up as a Woods Hole summer kid. Our parents were scientists at the MBL. We both worked as stewards running the MBL club back in the day. And she went on to become a filmmaker. She still is, documentary filmmaker. And when we started this, she had a film that was coming out and I had finished law school and had just made a film that I wanted to show to all my friends. And so we decided, why not start the Woods Hole Film Festival as the East Coast version of Sundance. Very tongue-in-cheek at that time. Little did we know that 30 years later we would still be doing this, that there would be no tongue-in-cheek aspect to it, but that we would still try and keep the same sensibility and the same connection to the Woods Hole community that we had initially as we grew the festival and as we really started to understand the importance of what we were doing and our place in the world. And these things really rolled out over time. So I've put together a little slideshow to help sort of narrate what I'm going to be talking about. And I put together some slides that sort of give you an idea of what we looked like from a visual perspective over the 30 years. And so I'll go through this fairly quickly. And like we said, if you have questions, just feel free to put them in the chat and we'll have time to speak afterwards. So the dates this summer. So we are now an 8-day event. The festival always happens the last day of July, last Saturday of July through the first Saturday of August. So July 27th, July 31st through August 7th. Normally, we are also an in-person event. I will talk about what the pandemic has meant to us a little bit later. Next slide, please. So when we first started out, these many years ago, our first film festival was at the Old Woods Hole Fire Station. That is where sort of everything happened. That was almost a newish space then, but Tom Renshaw and Ann Lewandowski were also using it to show 16 mm films. So we had the opportunity to go into a space that already had a little screening room already made for it. When we started showing films, they were on 16 mm. You had to get up into the booth, run the projector, and some of the other films that we showed were VHS. But the first festival was a 1-day, 1-hour event, completely sold out. And so that meant that we had to keep going because people obviously liked what we were doing. And I don't remember what we did for the second one, but the third one, we moved to Lilly Auditorium at the MBL and became a 4-day event. And that is the one where we really started getting films from different filmmakers who were working in the independent film sector. Kate knew most of them at that time. There was no such thing as a call for entries. There were just people making films. And the films that we showed at the first festival were made by filmmakers who, interestingly enough, are still working in the independent film world to this day, which is kind of amazing. Next slide, please. So you can see this is the program for the 4th Woods Hole Film Festival. It just gives you a sense of, you know, we were certainly not high tech. We were certainly not we didn't have lots of graphic design capacity, but we started getting films that were actually quite good. We also hooked up at this time with the Coolidge Corner Theater in Brookline. The Coolidge Corner Theater played a significant role in starting the Woods Hole Film Festival from a programming perspective, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Next, please. Next slide. So you can see this, you know, we started getting some attention. This is an article from the Cape Cod Times back in the late 1990s. But the Coolidge Corner Theater at that time, they had a program called Local Sightings. And we worked with them to bring local sightings on the road. And so this is an article about that. Next slide, please. We also started our first film workshops. And this film workshop was given by a filmmaker who's a Boston-based filmmaker. We showed her film, She Lives to Ride, at that time. And she did a workshop about documentary filmmaking. You know, we never went into this thinking about how we were going to grow the festival. Things just sort of happened organically. We also at that time were doing the series Local Sightings on the road throughout the winter. And so you'll see this, this workshop happened in the spring at the community hall. Next, please. At the time, there was no way to submit anything other than sending your VHS tape to us. And it was also very difficult to get the word out to the filmmaking community that the Woods Hole Film Festival existed. And so again, we worked with the Coolidge Corner Theater because they had a lot of relationships in the independent film world. And so this is the kind of thing that we would develop and put out for filmmakers to then send us. This was the application. It's much different now. Next, please. Again, just sort of an example of a program that we would put together. Things are a lot different. Back then, we didn't have any sponsors. We didn't have any advertising. Everything was just done in Times New Roman. Next, please. This is an example of a flyer that they put together. And you can see that if you look down at the very bottom, we're part of their series. And the person who curated most of the local sightings was the guy who ran the Coolidge Corner Theater. He actually saved it from being turned into a mall. And for those of you who may not know, the Coolidge Corner Theater is an art house cinema in Brookline, right in Coolidge Corner, near where I live. And he loved to program bizarre and weird films. And in fact, he also had a festival called the Festival of the Bizarre and the Insane, which was hugely popular. Next, please. We did an animation festival with one of the filmmakers, Bill Plimpton, whose work we showed at the first Woods Hole Film Festival. He is still doing animation. He's been nominated for several Academy Awards. Next, please. This is an example of something that, like the kind of film that we would show, documentary Carmen Miranda is My Business. And there was actually a car in Boston at that time, which would drive around with different Carmen Miranda headgear on top of it. It was fairly humorous. Next, please. Just a flyer of our 9th Woods Hole Film Festival. Next, please. Next. And again, just a little bit more information. You'll see we're starting to get into 2000. At that time, we also started to become a little bit more well-known. The internet really started to kick in. There was a submission platform called Without a Box that then became a way for us to have a presence and to reach out to more filmmakers. But it was still not a huge world in the independent film scene. This film that we showed at this festival, Strikers Passing, was a film made by Jeremy Mayhew on Martha's Vineyard. And we actually showed it, if you can imagine, at Otis Air Force Base. They have a movie theater there, which for a couple of years we were able to do events at until 9/11. Next, please. We started getting a little bit more graphically interesting. This is our 10th Woods Hole Film Festival, and that is when we started expanding the number of days and became, I believe, an eight-day event, and started establishing ourselves in the year, because there were also at this time other film festivals that started to spring up around Massachusetts. In particular, there's Rhode Island, which is still going on, Nantucket, Provincetown, and a little bit later, film festivals started to happen on Martha's Vineyard. And so it became important at that time for us to sort of have a time of year. Because then there was a circuit for filmmakers to start working on too. Next, please. This again was our call for entries. You'll see it's still not supremely sophisticated, but it is something, again, that would have been available for filmmakers to find and reach out to us. Next, please. And this would have been a program that we put together in 2003. Next. And you'll see we also started to get sponsors around that time and grants. We also would coordinate with other kinds of organizations, mostly music. This was a group called the Alloy Orchestra, which was formed in Boston. They still actually do perform, or would be performing if they could. They do live accompaniment to silent films, and they're pretty amazing. They're all working musicians in their own right, but what they do is they've gotten a few titles that have come out of copyright, and they perform to them. It's pretty magical. This event we did at Mashpee High School, because at that time, some of you may remember, they were trying to build a performing arts center in Mashpee, and this was the space that they were using until such time as they could raise the money that they needed to build that space, which ultimately never happened. So they were using Mashpee High School. Next, please. And then you'll see we started around this time to get a little bit more graphic design oriented. This is a whole program. If you look at inside of it, you would see a lot more descriptions, a lot more opportunities for people to do educational things that we had going on at the same time as the festival, and to participate in the festival as advertisers and sponsors. Next, please. We also started to get a little bit more well-known, not just in our own community, but in the filmmaking community at large. And we were lucky enough to realize that the gentleman at the top, some of you may recognize him, Gordon Willis, was one of the most famous DPs in his time. He was the director of photography for Francis Ford Coppola. So he shot Godfathers 1 and 2. He did a lot of films for Woody Allen. He was very, very well known. He happened to hate Hollywood. And after he retired, he came to North Falmouth. And so he lived here, and I got to know him. And so we did some screenings, and he did a workshop. This screening was at the old Nickelodeon Cinema, which I'm sure most of you remember. For many years, we were able to do screenings there, which was really amazing and great because it meant we could show 35mm films, which we did not have the capacity to do in Woods Hole. And we also then started having a lot more filmmakers come to Woods Hole. So at the bottom, you'll see that's just a representation of filmmakers who came. We started then having a lot more thought about what we were going to do with these filmmakers when they got here. So we had events and then really started to increase the social aspect of the festival. Next, please. So we can just go through these next few slides and you'll just see sort of what we looked like. And then we started getting into having to really put out much more direct and specific requests for advertisement and sponsorship to try and help us with the expenses of the event, which once we started to become an 8-day event and really were working with most of the organizations in Woods Hole to rent their spaces, things started to become much more expensive than they were initially. And so our venues at this time were still the community buildings, Woods Hole Community, the community hall, the fire station, still the Lilly Auditorium. And then you'll see a little bit later, we started using Redfield Auditorium. After 2001, we were not allowed to use the Otis Air Force Base anymore. And a little bit later, when the Nickelodeon became Regal Cinemas, they decided that they didn't want to have us there in the summer either. And so, you know, it took a little bit for us to really find our footing as to where we were going to be as we started growing from a 1-day, 1-hour event to a multi-day, multi-venue event where screenings were happening simultaneously. Next, please. So you can just keep going through these and you'll just see that, okay, so this, we start getting into, I don't know if any of you were there, but we started to do some outdoor screenings. And this one we showed in what is now, I forget the name of the park that, right next to the NBL Club. Before it was in the park that we have there today, it was just pretty much a flat space. And so we were able to set up something that we called Project Green Screen. And this was very early on in the idea of renewable energy to do this, but it was a renewable energy system that somebody built where we were able through wind and solar to get enough battery power to power a projector and show films outside right next to the NBL Club. So we showed this film, The Legend of Lucy Keys by John Stimpson, who happens to be a North Falmouth person. And he just shot a film in Falmouth this year that he does a lot for a Lifetime now. The funny thing about this screening was it's a little bit of a scary film. So in the middle of the film screening, the wind came up and everyone started kind of getting a little spooked out. But as the wind came up, the screen started falling over. So he, the filmmaker, had to stand behind the screen for the second half of the film and hold it up so that the screen didn't fall over. But that was kind of a fun thing to have this kind of an outdoor screening. Next, please. We started getting noticed by, people outside our area. This is the Boston Globe. We were in Names and Faces. If you look sort of in the middle, you'll see where it says Festival Awards. And we gave an award to a filmmaker who was at that time working for the mayor of Boston. Great film, great guy. He actually went on to become one of the founders of WeWorks later on. But it was really around then that we started getting noticed, not just by the media outside our local area, but by the film community outside the Cape as a place where filmmakers wanted to go and wanted to connect with each other. Next, please. So we also started to realize that, in addition to just showing films, at this time, lots of festivals were having sort of special guests. And so this is Les Blank, who some of you may remember. He's no longer with us, but he came as a filmmaker in residence. And this is, you'll see, we started using Redfield Auditorium again, even back in this time, 2007, Redfield Auditorium was still less than a great place to show films in terms of the technology. And so from about 2007 to the middle of the next decade, we were sort of struggling to keep up with technology. And at some point later on, we were able to work with the Oceanographic to get them to understand the great space that they had, but the fact that they needed to have better projection. And so we worked with them to put a digital cinema projector in that space. A little bit later, I'll talk about that. Next, please. This was another one of our guests, Ricky Leacock, who is also a very well-known filmmaker back in the day. Next, please. And around this time, we also, and I don't exactly remember what year this is, but we started getting a little bit of pressure to differentiate ourselves from just all the other film festivals that were around. And because of where we're located, being in Woods Hole, we realized that, that we have the scientific community right here, and that it made a lot of sense for us to sort of shift our programming when possible to include films about science issues that were being, that were the subject of what was happening at the various institutions. And because we already, we were known by the NBL, a little bit known by at who we starting around then, we started to do programming where we could invite then scientists in to amplify the films that people were seeing. And so I'm sure probably most of you have heard of The Cove when it came out a long time ago. Next, please. We started getting filmmakers of renown. This is Barbara Koppel. She has won, I think, several Oscars, and she actually came back 2 years ago with another of her films. Next, please. And, I just put this in as a slide. We started getting people coming to our screenings and started to really feel like a festive festival experience, which is waiting in line, talking to people, sort of the excitement that you feel when you're at a film festival, when the community starts sort of feeling a buzz with creativity. Next, please. This is just, we also had to recognize that we didn't want to just have serious documentary films, although we could show nothing but documentaries and shorts, but we like to also have a little bit different programming. And so this was a kind of goofy film called The Selling. Next, please. You can keep going. So this gentleman, I don't know if anybody recognizes him at all. His name is Wavy Gravy. And people always ask me every year, what's your favorite film of the festival? Or, what do you like best? And, I can't really, as a film festival director, say that because all the films are there. We want all our filmmakers to succeed. But sometimes we have films at the festival that just capture the audience in a way that you can't make this happen. It just happens, which is the wonderful thing about a film festival. There's discovery. There is, people have no idea when they're coming to a film festival what they're going to see. A lot of people get kind of anxious about that because they're like, there's so many films. How do I know what I want to see and how do I make decisions? This film, it was called Saint Misbehavin', about Wavy Gravy, a documentary about him. So he was very well known from the Woodstock era. He was the person who, along with the band, the Merry Pranksters, like they traveled around with Ken Kesey on the bus, but they went to all these festivals, and like at Woodstock, they had the tent where people could go if they were having problems. He just became a cultural icon in and of himself, and he, with Larry Brilliant, then went on to do a lot of work in India, trying to help people get access to eye care. I believe he is still alive, but just having him here was one of the most exciting things that I've ever experienced, because you walked into the room at Redfield Auditorium and it was electric with energy. So that was really fun. Next, please. We also then around 2012, started realizing, in addition to the screenings, we had to have a full docket of things for people to do both day and night. And so we had parties at the various restaurants in Woods Hole and Falmouth. And we started bringing in music every night too, and had workshops, panel discussions, and events for kids as well. Harder to get kids, as I'm sure you all know, to go indoors in the summer to watch films. So that has been something. And it's also harder to get kids to really watch films inside any time of year these days, because they're not used to sitting in a movie theater watching movies. Next, please. We did another special event. This one we collaborated with the JFK Museum in Hyannis, showing this film, Letters to Jackie. And that was great to collaborate with the museum. We did a couple of collaborations with them, but as we started getting noticed more, we started getting more and more inquiries from other kinds of organizations who wanted to partner with us. And so we started trying to do some more collaborations outside of the festival. Next, please. So one of the things that started happening sort of in the late 2000s is we started getting a lot of films that were coming out of places like Sundance, or I think by this time Tribeca was more established, or South by Southwest, filmmakers who were sort of on that circuit, who were later going to be going on to becoming very well-known filmmakers. This film, Detropia, was made by a filmmaker named Heidi Ewing. She and Rachel Grady are very well-known film collaborators out of New York. I will not be surprised this year if Heidi is possibly nominated for an Academy Award. But she came to the Woods Hole Film Festival and liked it so much here that she comes back now to Woods Hole every summer. Next, please. This is just like a little sort of sampling in the early days of these are the kinds of things we played. You'll see it's a VHS tape. We tried not to play VHS at the festival if we didn't have to, but beta and then DVDs. Next, please. We also did an event at the Nickelodeon. We showed a film this film Passage to Paradise, that Julie Harris starred in, and she was living on the Cape, so she came to the screening, as did Pat Metheny. And that was another one of those like electric kind of experiences, because everybody loved Julie Harris. Everybody, I mean, the room at the Nickelodeon, the big room in those days, I think held like 500 people, and it was packed to the gills. And she was just a wonderful person. That was an amazing event that we did. And, those kind of special events became something that we tried to do more of when possible. Next, please. So you can keep going. We also, around this time, started to realize, well, we do so much throughout the year to put all these films together. Why not try and spend more time rolling them out individually? Because sometimes people would say, there's so many films to see in the festival, I don't have time. So we started with the Captain Kidd doing dinner and a movie before they did their renovations in that dining room, and we worked with them to put projection in there. And that was a really fun thing for a number of years that people loved to do, because you would come into the Captain Kidd, sit there, have your dinner, and then the film was right there. I do wish we could do stuff like that, and hopefully we will be able to do it again. That really was great, dinner and a movie. Next. You can keep going, just showing you. This film, Harry and Snowman, that we showed a few years ago. So this filmmaker has just written us now. He's making another film. This is just an example. When we showed this film, we could have shown it every single day of the festival and shown nothing else, because there's sometimes that films just hit, people want to see them, people love them, but it's great. He's coming back hopefully next year with his next film. We also started really getting probably a little bit close to 100 films that we would screen at the festival around this time. Next, please. We started attracting distributors. These two folks came out from California. As part of the effort to attract filmmakers, you really have to have a lot for them to do as well. And as much as they want to be part of the Woods Hole community and get to know each other, independent filmmakers are always looking for ways to get their films distributed. And so we had a relationship with these folks for a few years. Next, please. You can keep going. So I had mentioned, we like to have music events whenever possible. And this is Sam Bush. Sam Bush is an incredible mandolin player, really well known in the bluegrass world. And there was a documentary made about him, and it just so happened that he was able to come here. And another one of these electrifying experiences where he came. This is talking after his screening, and then everyone went to the landfall where there was a band playing in tribute to Sam Bush. But of course, he walks in, loves it so much, he hops on the stage with the musicians who are local musicians. And it was like, for them, they're like, okay, we can die now. But he was just the nicest person and is still playing to this day. And we're hoping to have more people like Sam come back to Woods Hole when we can really start doing things in person again. Next, please. You can keep going. So you see, we start getting into our octopus phase. We also realized, from a design perspective, that as science became more sort of something that we were known for, we wanted to incorporate images of the sea. And so octopi have been one of the things that that's our look for a little while now. Next, please. We also, started being a little bit more noticed in the community and becoming eligible for grants. This is a grant we get from the Falmouth Fund on an annual basis. And it's really great that we have a lot of support from many local foundations on the Cape. Next, please. Next, please. So we just, some of you may have gone to the event that we did last week with Jeff Daniels, but a couple of years ago, we showed Jeff Daniels' film Guest Artist. He couldn't come to the festival because he was on Broadway at that point in time, but we're hoping that he will come to the festival either virtually or in person at some point in the future. Next, please. This is just a slide sort of showing what it looks like, or a typical Q&A, and you can see the screen behind where we're all standing. So we worked with Hui, as I mentioned previously, to put in much better screen and projection and sound. And so Redfield Auditorium is a wonderful place now to see films, and I really hope we'll get back there. Next, please. Again, a shot of what it looks like during the festival. Next, please. Lilly Auditorium, same kind of thing. We know that Lilly has really over the years upgraded their projection and sound too, and we are talking to them. If the MBL is back open this summer, we hope to be back in there at least in some way. Next, please. For our panel discussions and workshops, we would invite the filmmakers who were at the festival to participate in. This is about science and filmmaking, and I'll talk a little bit more about our Film and Science Initiative in a few minutes. Next, please. This a few years ago was our staff. So we went from having like just 2 people to many people, and this isn't even everybody, but it takes a lot of people to put the festival together. And so last year was a big shock, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes, but you'll see, it's about a little over 20 people to make the festival happen. And that's not even everyone, because some people were virtual even then. Next, please. And so last year, we basically on March 13th, the week before, we had just had a sold out screening at Redfield Auditorium, had our spring planned out for us. We were going to be doing some more great events. And then all of a sudden the world changed. And we, along with every other film festival and everybody else in the world, but I'll just talk about the film festival side of things, had to figure out very quickly what the heck we were going to do, because March is our first deadline for submissions. April is our second, and May is our last. And then we tell the filmmakers in the middle of May if their films have been accepted to the festival. So you can imagine in the middle of March, the whole world shuts down and we're like, well, what the heck do we do? Do we cancel? Do we postpone? Do we do something else? And so we are part of, and I helped found an organization called the Film Festival Alliance, which brings together film festival personnel and film festival people from all over the country to be able to talk to each other and learn best practices. And, you know, we watched South by Southwest close down, Tribeca, like all these festivals. They didn't just go virtual, they canceled because they happened early enough so that the idea of having a virtual film festival did not even exist yet. But we were on weekly Zoom calls with these folks and realized that it would be possible. And we hoped maybe by the end of July, who knew, we hoped that we'd be back in person, this pandemic would be behind us. But we quickly realized that wasn't going to happen. So we had to figure out very quickly how to put on a virtual film festival when the technology sort of existed, but the capacity and the platforms and the relationships that we needed to have with the technology companies and they with each other were still in the process of being formed. So we took a very big leap of faith and we decided we were going to do a virtual festival. And for us, at that time, virtual festivals were getting poo-pooed. The distributor world, the sales world for independent films, they were telling filmmakers not to do them because it would hurt their premiere status. And because everybody anticipated that everyone else would be back in person pretty soon. And so, you know, we had to overcome that. We had a number of filmmakers last year who decided that they weren't going to be part of the festival, even though we had accepted them, because they were being told not to do a virtual event. There was no definition of what a virtual film festival meant. So we decided that what we were going to do is try and produce a festival that as closely as possible resembled a traditional Woods Hole Film Festival, to make people who were not in Woods Hole feel like they were here and part of the community and to create community. It was one of the most difficult things we've ever done, but I'm so amazed with what our staff did. And last year we showed 187 films. We had about 90% participation from the filmmakers, which is not the usual because, you know, having them travel here and having to put them up and stuff is quite expensive. And then we had films from around the world. Things went fairly well, I have to say. However, it still was very hard for us to really have the same kind of audience engagement that we would have in a live space. And so if you look back at the Wavy Gravy or the pictures that I showed you of the audiences, you know, part of the magic of a festival is to have everybody in the room at the same time and have everybody be able to talk with the filmmakers and walk up and down Water Street and have that electric energy. So right now, this week, as I mentioned, is this film conference. And people are talking a lot about what the future of festivals is going to be, not just from a technology perspective, you know, how you do create community, because we don't expect virtual festivals to go away anytime soon, even when people can gather in person again. There will always be space for the virtual world. But there also is a lot of discussion right now about what a film festival is, what it will look like, what the role of the film festival in the world is. And I think people are exhausted because it is a really hard thing to keep this all going for many of us. You know, the funding is much different. The attendance is much different. It's much harder to know if what you're doing is the right thing to do for your audience. It's much more challenging to know who your audience is, because your audience can now be from anywhere. So there's still a lot of things that we'll need to shake out, but what I'm hearing is that people are very committed to making sure that festivals stay alive, that festivals, this is a good time for festivals to sort of rethink what they do. There's a lot of sort of thought around festivals as a social society platform. I'm not sure what that will really shake out to be, but I think people feel like, the films and the filmmakers are even more important now than ever in terms of how you program a festival, what that means to the community, what stories festivals tell. One of the things we were able to do this year, which I'm very proud of, is we started a programming fellowship, realizing that, we're going to be 30 years old. We need to make room for other people to come into this world. And this is just us, but we're sort of doing this on behalf of our colleagues as well. We need to make room for other people to come into this world. But in order to do that, we need to make sure that they know what this world is and how to navigate this world and how do you program a festival. So we have our first programming fellowship happening right now. We have 6 people who we hope will, we know they're learning a lot. It's a wonderful thing. And we hope that this year's programming fellowship will sort of be the platform to grow this, hopefully nationwide. And so we can work with festivals all around the country to help develop the next generation of programmers and film festival personnel. That's the other thing people are talking about now, which is like film festivals were traditionally seen as kind of like a gig thing. There was no such thing as a person who worked at a film festival and had a full-time salary and made a living from it until maybe a few years ago. But still, most film festival people don't work at their festivals year round because they haven't been year-round organizations. That is all changing. And so I think you're going to see a lot of great things happen, but it's going to be a little bumpy over the next few years, especially as the pandemic recedes, to see, what happens with the in-person capacity. I'm concerned personally about there's going to be a lag in a couple of years of films that will be available because filmmakers will have had a couple of years where they can't really make films. And so what happens if you don't have all these great films that we've had access to in the past? And then the other thing that's happening is, all of a sudden everybody's realizing, oh gosh, streaming is here to stay. And I'm sure you've all followed this, a lot of the big major studios, like they just go straight to streaming. They're bypassing theatrical altogether. So there's a lot of competition for so-called content. And so films that we would normally have access to throughout the year are now becoming unavailable in some circumstances because, if Netflix has a film, they're not going to necessarily let us show it because we're streaming it as well. So even though we are still, and when I say we, it's not just us, it's the film festival world. We're still the little dogs, but we have a big impact. And so, a lot of us are trying to figure out what our relationship is going to be with those kinds of streaming platforms going forward. So there's a lot to think about, which we never really thought we would need to understand or even figure out for most of us who just want to really actually show films and have audiences. It's a very confusing time. It's also a very challenging time with funding. And this is sort of the last thing I'll say, even though we have some other things for you guys to see, maybe I'll show them to you after we talk. But, just yesterday, we were all prepared to apply to the Academy, the Oscars. They have a grant. Well, they just decided they weren't going to do their grant this year, even though the grant was due Friday because of the pandemic. And so it's kind of like we're all being whipsawed, and we all just want to make sure, and I want to say we all, it's film festivals, when you have a situation like we're in now, funding is much more difficult to come by from the traditional philanthropic organizations because there's so much need in the social world, whether it's food, housing, anything else, everything else that is really super important. All of a sudden, arts and culture come last. And there have been study after study done this year showing the devastating impact of the pandemic on arts and culture. And I'm sure I see Laura here. I'm sure you can talk about this a little bit too. But, just as, if it's seen as a last thing, that is always going to be a problem. I think there's a huge effort now for people to say arts and culture isn't last, it's crucial. And so hopefully going forward, there will be more funding available. Massachusetts, we have the Mass Cultural Council, but we have very, very little money that actually goes to arts and culture organizations. So as much as all we wanted to be doing is showing films to audiences, there's all the stuff which every nonprofit has to do in the background that we never really saw as being part of the what we would be doing on a day-to-day basis. One last thing. So the Film and Science Initiative, we started about 5 years ago, realizing again that we were in Woods Hole. We wanted to make sure that we were a place where filmmakers and scientists could come together to talk to each other and to collaborate on telling stories. And so this year, we will be putting out our first 2 films we've been producing. One of them is about Bruce Strickrott, who is the head of the Alvin Group. So it will be about a 30-minute documentary that we're making about him. That should hopefully come out this spring. It would have been out last summer, except right in the middle of filming it, the pandemic hit. And so we had to stop filming for a while. The filmmakers we're working with are in New York. Then the other film that we're making is about youth activists and climate change, bringing together youth climate activists and scientists who are working in the fields that they're working in. We're working to create a series around that. Again, the pandemic sort of put that on hold. We hope that we will be able to get back to that very shortly, but we'll have 2 films coming out this year that we've produced. And then we're also working with some filmmakers on Martha's Vineyard who are producing a feature documentary about the right whales. So it's a pretty exciting year, and it's great to have sort of that aspect of the festival happening as well. In the future, our goal is working with WHOI and MBL and the Woodwell Center and NOAA Fisheries to really be able to have a conference that brings together filmmakers, scientists, film funders, and distributors with the goal of making sure that we are known as a place that does that to hopefully make better films around science, because there's so many great stories that are happening here that need to be told. So I will, Griffin, let's not show those other slides right now. Let's go back to, so we can see the chat. Does anybody have any questions? Hi, Dina. I'll call on you if you don't have any questions.
Can you hear me? I have one.
Yes. Yep.
How do you go about selecting the films?
That is a good question. So we receive about 1,000 films submitted to us from around the world. We start receiving the films in October. We end our submissions at the beginning of May, and we have a group of people who are screeners who watch the films, and we also then have programmers. So each film gets watched twice. It gets rated. We have discussions, and then we sort of, it's like a funnel. We try and funnel it and put together a final list of films that we would like to show if we had room. The room issue is less of a problem in the virtual space, but we still aren't just going to show hundreds and hundreds of films yet. So we select them based on a variety of factors, but if you want more information, I can certainly tell you more about that. Chris Poloni, Chickenpox Pal, that was a great film. Yes, that was. I see Dina Pandya on here. I will say, so Dina, your sister, is an astronaut. Her sister is an astronaut. And so a few years ago, we were lucky enough, NASA was in the trying to like get more connected to the general public. So we were able to have her come here and talk about, oh, actually from the space station, she did. Dina, you want to make yourself visible here? No.
Oh. Hi.
Do you remember what year that was?
Was that after 2012?
I think so.
Yeah, I think it was at that time frame.
But from the International Space Station, she did a shout out to the Woods Hole Film Festival. And the thing about NASA, I don't know if anybody knows this, they have amazing archival footage, which they will let filmmakers use for free. And so it's a wonderful, wonderful federal agency. And Dina, isn't she going back up this year?
It's not clear, but she's going to go on the Boeing Starliner, but they haven't had their first one up yet. You know, the first trial one for the short duration, but she'll be on the second one for the long duration.
And Hui has a relationship with NASA too. A lot of the scientists who work at Hui on the ocean research work in partnership with scientists at NASA.
The Ocean Worlds project, like
Yep.
finding water on the moons and different planets.
Anybody else? Beth. What is the possible continuation of the pandemic due to your staffing plans for this year? Oh gosh, that is a really good question. I mean, so our office is right in the middle of Woods Hole, right above what used to be Liberty House and Howling Bird, which is an empty space now, unfortunately. And normally we would have like, 10 to 15 people in our little rabbit warren of offices all summer. But last summer we had 4 of us. We had a lot of people working on the festival in other places, but we couldn't have interns. We couldn't have, the public coming upstairs every day, and we just didn't have the need for the same number of people. So the virtual world is both great in some respects because you don't need as many people, but it's bad too because the people are what make the festival festive. So there were a few nights when we came out of the festival, and this was kind of shocking, festival office around 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and Water Street was empty. This is in July. There was no car on the street. So that was just like a very hard thing to wrap our minds around. And I would love it, if we were back to full staffing. I mean, it's so much fun. But, there's just no way for us to know anything right now. My board keeps asking, so we're going to be back, having 5 screening venues and having, all these things happening simultaneously. And we'd like to, but one of the things we are trying to do is work with technology. There is now technology that has become available to sort of fill the gaps between the ability to show films online and the need to be able to create community. So there's certain platforms that we're looking at now that will allow the community aspect of what we do to be replicated in a virtual space. And while it's not necessarily something that is a complete fix for not, having an in-person event, it really is kind of fun. And there's tons of stuff you can do. So I think regardless of whether we can be in person, we'll still have that virtual community. And so hopefully we will then be able to pick up more staffing as that becomes available. And sometime maybe in the next couple of months, if you get on our email list or contact me at woodsholefilmfestival.org, info@, and I can put that in the chat if anyone is interested. We would invite you to participate in a demonstration of this new community space that we're hopefully going to be building out. It's weird and cool at the same time. Okay. Griffin, you see the Woods Hole Film Festival having a virtual component from now on? Yes. A lot of people said to us last year how great it was because they didn't have to find parking in Woods Hole, which, it's not a great thing. We want people to come to Woods Hole, but at the same time, we also realize there will be people from other parts of the country, other parts of the world who won't come to Woods Hole. And it will still be a way for them to participate. The other thing too about the pandemic is who knows when people are going to feel comfortable congregating again in a place like somewhere where you watch films. I mean, it's really hard to do social distancing and still have a fun film festival. I can't even imagine it personally.
Okay, any more questions for Judy? No? We're recording this, so if you have any friends who have missed this, you can look on our website in a couple days and it should be there. Judy, thank you so much. That was so interesting.
Oh, you're so welcome. And I just want to say we have screenings coming up all winter and spring. We have one this Saturday. We're working on something really fun, film about Doc Severinsen for the end of February that Doc will actually be at. He's in his 90s.
Oh,
Jimmy Tingle will be doing something with us in March. And so please support us. You know, we really are trying very hard to still keep the spirit and the whole film festival world alive in a time that is extremely difficult for everybody. So woodsholefilmfestival.org is the website, and feel free to get in touch. Thank you for having us.
well, thank you. And thank you, Griffin Kerstetter, for doing all the tech support for us. It really helped. And great. Thank you, Judy.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
See everyone.